Hello and welcome to the India Briefing. This is Mukulika Banerjee from London, joined by my co-host Pragya Tiwari from New Delhi. We are a new podcast and are thrilled with the support and enthusiasm you've been showing us. Thank you. We've been listening to your feedback, reading your emails, and one thing our listeners are keen that we cover are broad picture stories developing in India at the moment. In keeping with that, we thought today we would take a look at an interesting development in electoral politics. 2024 has been a very important year of elections in India, not just because the national elections were held, but a number of large states in India have also gone to the polls. One feature that is common to these various elections that have happened and is a developing trend is the rise of direct benefit transfers, DBTs, and its link with women voters.
And the reason we picked this is because Mukulika and we were talking earlier, like she said, it's been a big year for elections. And we were wondering what the big stories were when it came to elections this year. And honestly, one can't think of any one poll plank that was common to so many diverse parties from different ideologies than this one, DBTs for women. So let's start with talking about women voters first. As most of you will know, that from the inception of India as a republic, its constitution makers introduced universal adult franchise, which means women have voted from the very first general elections in India. They voted in large numbers. But historically, women have been seen more as an extension of groups of voters, which are usually caste-based or community-based or region-based. They've not been looked upon as an independent bloc of voters. And arguably, that's what's really shifted in the last decade or so, where outside of the class they come from, caste they come from, community, region, family they come from, they are being looked upon as an independent bloc of voters.
And an early example was from 2015, wasn't it? When ahead of Legislative Assembly polls in Bihar, a large state in North India, Nitish Kumar, an old and established leader of Bihar politics and current chief minister of the state, in 2015, he promised prohibition on alcohol if he was elected. Now, this was in response to a demand raised by women from across communities in the state, owing to the rising incidence of addiction. He said he would do it. Women voted in large numbers and his alliance won. So it was an early case of success of responding to a specific demand from women as a constituency in themselves. Now, obviously, this wasn't the first time, we had a pro-women policy. It's been put in place in southern states, in West Bengal, in the east. State governments, central governments have all responded and put in place different development policies aiming to make women's lives, health better. But this is one of the first times where women are being targeted with a populist policy as a vote bank in itself.
Absolutely. This is a very important distinction to make. By no means are we saying, and this, this is worth reiterating, that this is the first time we're seeing, policies, specifically being made for women and children, girl children. This is, perhaps one of the first instances of a populist policy that has been made for targeting women voters. And we're using the term populist here because perhaps there isn't sufficient evidence that prohibition works as a measure to control addiction and so on. But that's a separate conversation for another time. Subsequently, other regional and national parties in state elections start promising grand schemes with a view to mobilize women voters. And this is taking cognizance of the fact that even though women have historically voted in large numbers, the participation rate of women voters has lagged behind those of men. And over the past decade and some years, this gap has been closing. And so much so that there are constituencies in which women are outnumbering men as voters.
Let's take another example. In last year, in 2023, in the Karnataka assembly elections, the Congress party had a historic win. And data suggests that it was women voting in large numbers that favored the party in response again to promises that the Congress made specifically to women. And this included free bus rides, but also crucially, it included cash transfers. And this came close on the heels of the Congress party's win in Himachal Pradesh, a northern state, in the year before, where again, in response to the poll promises made to women, women voters favored the Congress party and contributed to their win. Similarly, prior to that, in 2021, the eastern state of West Bengal went to the polls again for their state assembly elections. And the chief minister, Mamata Banerjee, promised cash transfers to women, and it is believed to have cemented her relationship with women voters. In 2021, there was a real concern about anti-incumbency factors because she'd been in power already for 2 terms, but she won very convincingly. So clearly, women have been playing a very significant and pivotal role in determining wins of political parties.
Now, obviously, by 2023, the Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, effectively the governing party in the center, had also caught on to this. And one very interesting thing that happened last year in October was that the central government passed the Women's Reservation Bill. Now, I say interesting because first, let me tell you what the Women's Reservation Bill is. It essentially guarantees 1/3 reservation for women in the center and state legislators. Now, I say it's interesting because even when the bill was passed, it was clear that it's not going to be implemented anytime soon, and we still don't know when it's actually going to be implemented. But it's widely believed that the reason it was passed in such a hurry was because the BJP was targeting women voters in the upcoming general elections in 2024 that happened earlier this year. Now, again, even the BJP, since it's come to power in 2014, has introduced multiple policies targeting women voters, most notably perhaps offering free cooking gas to women. But nothing of this scale ever has been implemented by them as the Women's Reservation Bill was. It was a very significant move, and it is a bill that has been in the works for many, many decades.
Now, in light of what we've been saying about the successes of various political parties, especially opposition non-BJP parties winning in different state elections, the BJP itself did not do very well in the national elections this year, right, in 2024. And data suggested that they did better amongst male voters than with women. But this did not deter their push for women voters, and they've doubled down, in fact, in the state elections that have followed the national elections this year. And there was a fiercely competitive outreach to women in manifestos. The focus, however, has been on this one policy, direct benefit cash transfers to women. In last year's state elections in Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh, poll promises for cash transfers to women played a big role in the BJP's win. And this year, when Haryana went to the polls, the Congress promised women 2,000 rupees. The BJP immediately trumped that and promised 2,100 rupees. DBT promises were also said to have played a massive role in getting the BJP elected in Maharashtra, and Jharkhand Mukti Morcha with the Congress in an alliance in Jharkhand made a similar promise and reaped the benefits. So this is, we say this is a big picture story because there are different political parties making different kinds of other policies, but DBT is something that has emerged as a winning poll promise or policy specifically targeting women.
Yeah, and now there are 10 odd states at least that have either announced or implemented such schemes. Now, on the face of this is a step in the right direction because at the end of the day, women are getting money into their bank accounts, and there is some data to suggest at least that it does empower them to make independent financial decisions. And even if this is being done for cynical reasons, this has to be applauded. However, there are a couple of caveats.
Now, the perceived electoral successes of these schemes has led to competitive populism and is raising concerns because the question really is, can states and the centre afford the cost to the exchequer imposed by these cash transfer schemes? It's causing fiscal deficits in state budgets. While they all have some criteria, they very nearly amount to what is effectively universal basic income for women in the states where they've been implemented. For example, the state of Delhi, it's going to polls next year in January, very early next year. And the incumbent Aam Aadmi Party has just announced a DBT scheme for women in their manifesto that will cost over $1 billion, a sum the government's own finance department is unsure that they can afford, given the deficit already existing.
And these concerns have been raised everywhere. These concerns have been raised in West Bengal about what it's costing the exchequer, and it's been raised in Maharashtra. It's being raised again across states. Now, according to a study by Goldman Sachs, states in India are currently committed to upwards of $18 billion for cash transfers for women, just this one particular policy. Now, in a country with limited resources, these cash transfers are bound to be at the expense of investment in human capital as well as infrastructure that can lead to sustained economic and income growth. Now, this is problematic because India was already underspending on health and on education to begin with. And now, unsurprisingly, India's education allocation has fallen further from 3.4% of the total budget expenditures in 2019-2020 to 2.6% in the interim budget of 24-25. Health allocation declined from 2.3% of the total budget in 1920 to 1.9% in the 24-25 interim budget. Meanwhile, both states and the centre are drastically behind their capital expenditure targets. The welfare state, as it is evolving in this moment, is essentially a substitute for the state not being able to build an economy that can guarantee jobs, that can bring jobs to people and guarantee basic incomes. Now, at best, direct benefit transfers, cash transfers, can be a short-term measure to tide over this crisis. But we need investment in human development, in infrastructure, in order to address the underlying issues. But the concern right now is that this short-term measure may have a huge opportunity cost, so much so that it might get in the way of India being able to take the steps that are needed to secure the future of billions of Indians.
And there is an irony, Pragya, and it is poignant. I mean, the irony is that this emphasis on DBTs to women voters is happening at precisely the point at which women's participation in the labor force has been dropping. And secondly, it's poignant because there is an assumption that women have the power and the autonomy to make the decisions on how that money is actually spent in the household. And we know that in cultural and social factors, poor financial literacy, all of these can lead to fairly ill-judged expenditures. There are studies that show that cash transfers, for instance, are more likely to lead to calorie-rich foods like samosas, rather than nutritional for diversified cereal intakes, for instance, that is needed to address deficiencies.
Now, the proponents of cash transfers argue that they're more efficient because they cut out the intermediaries. And this is a valid argument. One can't take away from it, but it is not the whole picture. Access to the benefits are often still impeded by inefficient financial infrastructure and targeting errors. There is an additional problem. Cash transfers are very vulnerable to inflation and price volatility, which means their real value could be eroded, making them unreliable mechanisms for the protection of poor.
And Pragya, there are two further issues, I think, that we should note. One is an ethical issue, right? Whether these schemes, these direct benefit transfer schemes, these cash transfers to women voters, are premised on basically to win elections and to get votes. Right? The former Chief Election Commissioner, S.Y. Qureshi, in fact, commented on this, saying that these schemes announced around elections sound a little bit like bribery for votes. And so it raises this issue. It's an ethical issue. It is about transparency. It's about the integrity of the electoral process, that while it is paying dividends, is this an acceptable electoral practice, right, to get women's votes? The second thing is that so far, we've seen that this is working. There is a linkage. You announce cash transfers to women, women turn up and vote for the party that is offering them the best deal, so to speak. But India's electorate, we know, is massively complex. It is unpredictable. The Indian voter is impossible to predict. And it may be working in the short term at the moment, but in the future, in the longer term, is there any policy certainty? Is this going to continue to work? Right? Are women going to continue to always vote if cash transfers are promised to them? And whether the other factors that determine voter behavior in India, of membership of caste, of class, region, language, religion, all of these things, which are such important factors, may in fact redominate, how women choose to vote. So this is something that only time will tell, and we've got to continue to keep our research eyes on this.
Absolutely. Like you said, I think it's very important to bear this point in mind, that Indian electorate is very, very complex. And who would know that better than you, as someone who's worked on ground to try and figure out why people in India vote, what motivates them to vote, and so on. So all we do know for now is that right now there seems to be a link between the increased participation of women in voting and cash transfer SOPs that are being offered to them, primarily cash transfers. But women's participation, as you pointed out earlier, in the workforce and women's wider participation in politics remains at an unsatisfactory level. Now, whenever this women's reservation bill that has been passed is implemented, the latter, might change for the better. But for now, I think we can all agree that there is a lot that needs to be done when it comes to systemic gender inequality. And this is at best a drop in the ocean. We don't know if cash transfers are a step in the right direction or not, but even if they are woefully inadequate. But they are, on the other hand, costing exchequers a lot. So it remains to be seen how this trend plays out over the next couple of years.
I think that's all we have to say on this particular issue for now. But like with all these big trends, big stories, we will continue to follow them, maybe come back to them in the future. We would love, as always, to hear from you. Tell us what you make. Is this the kind of story that appealed to you? And a special plea really to everyone listening. I am just as guilty of this as an avid listener of podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I don't always remember to click and subscribe to that podcast because it's so easy to find them. If you're searching for something, you can. But we are an independently produced labor of love. And if you click that subscribe button or like it, it really helps the algorithm. So we would love you to be able to do that. It's going to mean a lot to us. And as always, you can write to us at tib@oijo.in. So until next time, goodbye and thank you for listening.
Thank you.